Hello everyone. We're going to try this code review thing again. Seemed pretty cool last time, so we'll do it again. So what's new this time? Well, if you're following the game, you would probably notice that this table looks totally different from how it used to look. And that's the overall goal of this commit, of this change that I'm pushing now. Is all the tables are now using the same code, and they also look a bit better. And they actually use real HTML tables here. You can see here, here's the table. And then a div surrounding it because, well, I don't know why. Just seemed sensible to put it in a div. So one thing that's also different is the text is bigger. I don't think that's going to be a big problem for most people, but if it is, I can definitely just change the CSS. It'll be a quick fix. And then here's the play from online. It's definitely looking better. You can click anywhere in it, and it'll click the radio button. Yep. Storage also has the same table. Okay, so we go look at the code. So we see lots of removing of code here, which is ultimately the goal. This was mostly just a code cleaning exercise at the end of the day, but it also gave me a chance to improve the visuals a little bit, in my opinion. Having it laid out like a table is a lot more sensible than like having a comma separated string for these three columns. Especially for something like this. This was an absolute mess. It was all comma separated before. It's debatable whether I need to be showing this much information anyways. The storage feature isn't really all that well thought out at this point. But what do you know? What are you gonna do? So where to start? Let's look at so there's three main. I guess I'll start with the classes, the three main classes that I added. I added a paginated list, a radio table, and page controls. So the paginated list is the underlying data structure that I'm using for any table that's paginated. This is not a paginated table because there's no page controls. This is a paginated table and it has page controls. So that's the difference. And this functionality already existed in the online playlist class and also the storage list class. This was all already in both of those classes, and I just extracted the common elements from it. So what is a paginated list? It has all contents, which is an array of something, of objects, could be anything. And then it also has current contents, which is going to be whatever the contents of the current page. And we also got a page size. I have a default page size, and there's the current page. And what do you do with a paginated list? Well, you do have to initialize it with some contents. That is handled in each of the classes that inherit from paginated lists. It seemed like the most sensible way to do it, although there's certainly 100 other ways that you could think of initializing this. You could make it not abstract and just have a constructor. I didn't really need to do it that way because I already had these two classes lying around, storage list and an online playlist. So it just, I don't know. That's just how I felt I should do it. Naturally, you can get the current page, you can get the next page, you can go to, not get the next page, but go to the next page. And then you can go to a previous page. And then I would say this part is the essence of the pagination. This part and valid page size. Yeah. This is the essence of it, and it's a little bit long. It'd probably be better if it was a smaller function, but this is what we've got. And the idea is when you set a page, it first validates it, and then we get the indices, the min and max index, And these indices correspond to the all contents array. And that will essentially tell you the bounds for the current contents. And once you know the bounds for the current contents, then you just load up the current contents array with the contents based on those index bounds. And so you just repeatedly call this .current contents.push. And then you set the current page, and then you update the page size. Right, because page size is an optional parameter to this. I'm not really using it, but I thought it could be useful at some point in the future when I was doing this whole pagination concept in the first place. So it's going to stay there. Realistically, I could get rid of it. I don't know what I would use it for in the future. Like, why would you want to have different sized pages? Even if it's like the last page of a list, if it doesn't divide evenly into pages, that's not a problem. You don't need to change the page size. So that's a little bit weird. It's a little bit weird as far as it's a strange implementation, but it's not causing any problems. Is valid page number is between 0 and the max. How do you know the max page number? This is actually it took some time to get this actual formula right, but you take the length and you divide by the page size, and then you take the floor. And also page numbers are 0 indexed, despite the fact that I display it as 1 indexed. Because, most people don't want to start at 0. They want to start at page 1. So that's the pagination functionality. And I could show storage list. Yeah, I might as well show the lists that now are using the paginated list. So we deleted, well, you'll recognize this, the set page, get page. All the stuff that's in paginated list is now gone. So yeah, that's out of there. And what functionality remains? Oh boy, it's hard to tell because Git just chopped it up so badly. Let me open it. Let me just look at, what was the file again? Well, what is the file? Storage list. Yeah, okay. So this is what remains in the file. We've got the loading the storage, which is an asynchronous call. That was already there. And this is the main thing that's changed. Like I said, your paginated list needs to be initialized somehow. And we're extending the paginated list to add this initialization functionality. And all it does is it knows how to get all the contents. And how does it get all the contents? Well, we have the storage client thing, which is a whole other story. That hasn't changed. And what do we do once we get... So, yeah, we have to do this. You'll see this in the online playlist as well. We need to convert the data, which is... Well, it's actually a little bit more complicated here because the storage... we have the key for the storage, but then we need to... Yeah, so we need to do this whole process of loading up the replay, all the replays for a particular song, and then getting the best replay, and then scoring that replay. It's actually a lot of stuff to fill out this, because I don't actually store the top score. I only store the replays, and it's debatable whether I should keep it that way. I might reconsider that later on. I'm not really sure what users want as far as this whole storage thing. Oh, also that these radio buttons don't do anything on the storage list yet. They could do something if you wanted, maybe. Maybe if you click on this, it'll load up the top score. Maybe it'll show you all the plays, all the stats for all the plays. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the users want. I don't know yet. But yeah, in general, this initialization needs to convert the data whatever various data is being represented by this table, it needs to convert it into a two-dimensional array of strings. And that's what this is doing now. And that's also what the online playlist is doing. So let's look at that. Well, hold on. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. The constructor calls super, no surprise there. Yeah, there's a state thing, but that was always there. Nothing too surprising. Yeah, nothing too surprising. Let's look at the online playlist. What did I just do? Huh, clicking that, okay. Git is weird, but whatever. Okay. Did Git chop up the, oh no, it's not quite as chopped up, so we can sort of look at this. The data being represented in the table is a bunch of songs. And naturally we need to convert each song to an array of columns or a row. And song to columns is just difficulty in song name. That's very simple. And then all the common functionality of a paginated list has been stripped out. Let's see. Changing the variable name is all that this is doing. Changing the variable name. Yeah, so actually online playlist now I think looks very simple. Yes, online playlist is now quite a small class. Loading the song stuff is still pretty complicated. Because we have to convert the files, but that most of that logic is not in here, which is good. That's what we want. Okay. So that's all the usages of the paginated list. It's only used in 2 places, but the code is much nicer now that we've broken it into its own class. It's clean code. You have to do that, basically. Especially since it's such a huge chunk of functionality that is essentially copied. If it was just like one thing that was copied and it's only used in 2 places, maybe you could argue, well, who cares? It's just in 2 places. Once you use it a 3rd time, then at least that's my arbitrary rule. I like to say, if you use it 3 times, then you have to. You have to break it into its own thing. Okay, but what's next? The paginated list is great. The page controls. Let's talk, because the page controls are actually relatively simple. So let's look at the page controls. What do the page controls consist of? Well, first, actually, so this pattern that I'm using for basically anything that relates to HTML elements, I use an abstract class and then I use a static create function because that's how all of my pages are structured, and so all the page UI elements, I could either have them be a separate class with a create function, or I could do it this way. And doing it this way won't be a problem as long as there's only ever one element. There's only ever one set of page controls on a single page. As long as that remains true, I can continue doing it this way, which is kind of a cheat, but it's fine. Okay, so what do page controls consist of? Well, you've got a button, you've got this text, you've got another button, and then you've got a div surrounding it. So logically, we should see that same structure. Oh, look, here's the div. And should I add a new line between this and, no, whatever. There's the div. There's the previous page, the left button. There's the text, and then there's the right button. Could I break this? Could I break each of these blocks into separate functions? Yes, I probably should do that, but I'm not going to do that right now. So what is the div? Is there anything special about the div? Well, it's just got a bunch of CSS classes. But besides that, nothing else really. The button, when you click the button, oh, by the way, so when you call create, you need to give it a paginated list. So the page controls are now designed to, they're sort of dependent on the functionality of a paginated list, but I think that's totally fine because a paginated list is very general, very generic. And what do you do? Well, when you click the previous page button, what happens? Well, you go to the previous page on the paginated list, and then you delete and create the whole table. So you remove the menu. So this page controls, what are you controlling the pages of? You've got a paginated list and some table, some menu, and you need the ID for that so that the DOM wrapper can remove that element. And then you update the page number text. Yep, so that's it. And it's going to be the same for next page as well, naturally. Page number text is equal to get current page plus 1. Yep, and because we're displaying it not as 0 based but 1 based, so you always do plus 1. Previous page button. Oh yeah, this is CSS class, and add the previous page button to the div. So page controls div.element.child. Yep. And it's going to be the same for the next page button. This should basically look identical. Oh, what is this? What is this random text here, right? This is the arrow symbols. These left and right things are they're not usual characters. They're not less than and greater than. So you have to use this weird this weird code for it. And the page number text. It is a span. That's the type of HTML, a tag that I'm using for it. It's got some CSS class associated with it, the global class. And page number text.element.html. Right, when you create it, it should be set to the current page. When you create it the first time. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, when you create it the first time, you need to set it to something. And then every time you click, it gets changed. Yeah, every time you click, it gets changed. That's good, that makes sense. I could do it a different way. I could say not just when you create the thing, but like on every draw frame, you could set the text. But why do that, right? Let's keep it event oriented, because that's how a UI is. And a UI is sort of inherently event oriented. So I think it makes sense to do it this way. But either way would obviously work. I've done some things not event oriented, so it's not like it's a hard and fast rule that I'm following. So those are the page controls. And where did I extract the page controls from? Well, you'll see the online playlist has gotten much smaller. Where did we steal it from? Wait, not the online playlist. We already looked at this. But the play from online, this is the page, the UI page. And yeah, so this draw page controls, huge block. I got to get rid of that. And storage didn't used to have page controls. I always intended it to have page controls because I was using a paginated list to back it anyways. But I was just lazy and I didn't add it because I figured, users aren't going to play 50 unique songs before I, get off my butt and add pagination, are they? Who knows? Okay. So we got to get rid of the draw page controls from there, but that was the only place it was in code. But now I also added the page control functionality to the storage list as a result of creating that class. And then okay, so this table, right? This is the biggest thing, right? 50. Yeah, this is like twice as big as the other things we looked at. So there's a lot of options with the table. I tried to minimize the number of options because I'm sure you could go crazy general with all the different ways that you could display a table. What do we have? We have a unique ID. Why do we need a unique ID? Why couldn't we just always use the same ID? In fact, we always use the same ID for page controls. But I didn't do that here because the radio buttons all need the same name. And I mean, arguably, I could have omitted the unique ID and just use the same. Radio name for every set of radio buttons. Yeah, logically, that is what I should do. Logically, that is what I ought to do. But I don't feel like doing that right now. But yeah, logically, I could do without the unique ID. Width. Every table needs a width and a height. And they especially need a height because in order to get this scroll bar to show up, just using CSS at least, you need to have a fixed height, and then you have this overflow Y scroll thing that you can set. Column widths, right? So each the width of each column needs to be adjustable, and you can't generalize it. Arguably, you could infer it based off the contents, but since it's paginated, the contents change every page, and so you can't really generalize it off the contents unless you had all the contents to look at. But the table doesn't ask for all the contents because it doesn't assume that you're using a paginated list. It just assumes that you want to draw whatever contents you're giving it, and whatever contents might exist in memory that you don't want to draw, it doesn't really care about that. So I figured the best way to make it look nice was to have the user not the player of the game, but have it in the API that you have to specify the column widths, and they're specified as percentages. I do sort of normalize them so realistically you could put anything in there as long as they're numbers, and it'll generalize them. It'll scale them so that they all add up to 100 essentially. Right, and that is done. Yeah, scale numbers to add up to 100. I'm looking for the number 100. Oh, right. I don't actually use 100, do I? I use 96. I use 96 because I, by default, allocate 4% of the UI for the radio button column. I don't have it in the API that you need to consider the header of the radio button thing. I assume that the user of this code doesn't really want to have to think about that. That it should just, like, by default, oh, hey, I want a table with radio buttons. So let me specify everything I would have to specify for a regular table, and then you just throw in the radio buttons for me. That's how I was imagining this API. So what does this thing do in general? The radio buttons all have the same name because that's how you group radio buttons together, so you can only select one of them at a time. And then we create the div, and div is equal to the div create result element. That's not anything really if it doesn't already exist. So this only gets done once. We set some CSS classes. We create a table. Yeah. Oh, well, one thing I did want to say is we could totally do without P5.js in this class. We could totally do without it because all that create element is doing is calling document.create element essentially, And so one thing you might think is like, well, what about P5JS's radio buttons? Like, I if you've used P5JS, you'll know that it does something special to make it slightly easier to add options to your radio buttons. I found that didn't give me enough flexibility to make them make the HTML be structured how I needed it to be. Because at the end of the day, we have these input elements that are that they're separated by a bunch of HTML code, right? Here's one input radio. There's another one. And there's not... how P5JS did it by default was just not going to work. So we could totally do without P5JS. And I think that's one of the weaknesses of the library, honestly, is that it doesn't do much for you. Well, it's not that that's a weakness of the library. It's that the library... it's that the HTML DOM API is pretty good, and so P5JS becomes superfluous. It's not really P5JS's problem. I don't know what they could do better. It's more just like, well, it's kind of not relevant anymore. But anyways, where was I? We style the table by giving it width and height. We add... Right, there's this... So the HTML and CSS for this table stuff was actually really hard for me to figure out. In order to have separate columns with separate widths, you need to use this whole column group concept. Yes, this thing. Right, you need to use this column group nonsense. And, I didn't actually look at that before. That's cool. And it should add up to 100. Yeah, that looks good. I mean, and it's certainly working, which is why I didn't really bother looking at it. Yep. I had to create a column group, and then there's also this header row. And so that's surely represented in the code. Yep, we add a header row. And see, I added this empty string header to their given list of headers, because this is the header for the radio buttons. And I just throw that in there for free because the user of the API does not want to have to think about that. And then what else? Right, we create the table body. Literally, this is a function of an HTML table element. You can just do .create tbody. And then you create a row, and that row has a radio button as the first element of it. That's what I mean by create row with radio. And you need to provide the body that you're adding to, and you need to provide the contents, and you need to provide the radio name, and you also need to provide the index. This actually becomes the ID of the radio button, and we need the ID. We need all the radio buttons to have IDs, essentially the index of them, so that when the user clicks on this, we could have an event set up saying like, oh, you clicked a radio button with the ID of 0. That must mean you wanted to access element 0 from the list that's backing this. And then, of course, that gets translated to another reference because it's a paginated list. But anyways, that's a little bit too complicated, going into too much detail. And what do we do? Oh, we put the table in the div. That's not surprising. We create this column group. We do the scaling the numbers to add up to 96. I essentially explained all of this. Nothing in here should be too surprising. We just add a column for each element of the column widths that's given. Yeah, we had a column. We scale numbers. We can get radio value. Why do we need to get the radio value? Right, okay, this is a little hack that I did right here. Okay, so all the code that was using the function, the idea of a paginated table, no, not paginated table, a table with radio buttons in it, all the code that was using that was assuming that you could call element.value. And that would work if we were using the P5JS radio group, if we were returning that. But now we're not returning that. Instead, we're returning this div. So I had to hack in like, oh, I'm going to overwrite what the divs.value would normally do, because that's not useful. I don't need that. And instead, when you call .value on it, like all the code was already doing, what you're going to do is you're going to call get radio value, radio table.get radio value, with this radio name, this same this thing, this right here, this same name that applies to all the radio buttons. And then once you do that, what does it do? Well, it literally gets all the elements with that name. This is not particularly elegant. I imagine this is what P5JS was doing on the back end to sort of group radio buttons together. That's one thing that like P5JS was definitely trying to make radio buttons nicer to work with by giving you that you can just call .value on it. But instead, I did it manually, and it wasn't actually that hard to figure out how to do. I mean, I did have to Google it, but at the end of the day, it's very simple. You just do get elements by name. You iterate through all of these radio buttons that have because I was smart and I set the radio name ahead of time. And then you look for the one that's checked. And then what I do is I return the radio options ID, because like I mentioned before, I'm sort of encoding their position in the list in the ID. I could have chosen to encode it, any number of other places, but I picked the ID. Is that a good idea? That might come back to bite me later, honestly, because ID maybe that's not the right place to put it. Maybe I should put it in value. I was worried that if I sensibly, yeah, it should be in the value, but yeah, whatever. It's not gonna cause a problem until much later, I think. Okay, what else do we do? What else does this magic table do? It creates a row with a radio. We can add a radio cell to a row. Right, and then this has the on-click thing. Right, so when you click a row, this is a little bit interesting, I think, actually. When you click a row, and what do I mean by click a row? I mean click this is actually the table row. So this anything that's not this in-between space here, I think. Yep, I think if you click this in-between space, nothing happens. Right, so anything that's not the in-between space, which is, it's sensible. There's not really a downside to that. That is a part of a row. And whatever row you've just clicked, well, here's what we do. There's an event that's fired as a result of clicking that row. And the target of that is typically going to be a TD. It's actually going to be this table data element. So you must have clicked in this box. What if you click here? Okay. That's like slightly not great. I would have preferred that you click anywhere in the table row, it would have. Huh. Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's not a big. Most people, I think, are going to be clicking the song title. Also, I did not. Why am I on that page? Anyways, so this is actually a little bit clever, potentially confusing as well. What it does is it'll get the parent element. I found that the target of the mouse event is typically a table data element. The parent of the table data element is going to be the table row element. And then, so once we have this row, what can we do? Well, then we just get the radio button that's associated with that row, get element by tag name input, and then we check it, which means we fill it in. So that was a little bit tricky to figure out. That was like a little bit clever. But everything else here is pretty straightforward, I think. Create radio input, has no value, has the ID given to it, yep. Yep, and the header row is a header row. Oh, okay, so there's one other clever thing, and now that exists in the CSS. Getting this row to stay here when you scroll is actually hard. It's actually hard. Like getting it to scroll is not so bad because you have to. Well, it's not so bad because I already knew how to do that. I already had code that did that. You have to have overflow y scroll, and you have to have a set height. And I don't think you have to have a set width, but you might. I don't know. But to get the sticky to work, apparently you also need top 0 at the same time. That's the annoying thing with CSS is some tag will not work, and it's not obvious why it's not working. Which is why I don't know. That's kind of why web development sucks a little bit, is because it's not clear why stuff doesn't work when it doesn't work. Unless you like go digging. I'm sure there is a way to know. I just don't know, and it's not intuitive for me to find out. It's very subjective, really, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, so this works, and that's why this row stays on top. And that was like an essential thing to have in this table for me. And so it's there, and it works, and everyone's happy about that. Okay, and now that I created this table, right, now that I created this radio table, that means that everywhere else that had a radio table could just use that class. And that means play from file. Play from file, it has a radio table. And all that really had to be done was to delete the code. Yeah, delete this code that was there, and then sort of wire it up properly. So that means that for this case, Avast is wanting to tell me that it updated. Great, thanks so much, Avast. Go away. Jeez, Avast. One of the things that had to be done on this particular page is that the modes need to be converted to a 2D array of strings. So that I had to add this get modes as string function. And I also moved this function already existed. I moved it up. And I renamed it. Huh. Oh, right. So this already existed, but it already existed in the UI util file. I don't know why it existed there, because no other class was using it. So, past me, I don't know what I was thinking. So this orders them, which is a complicated thing that I don't want to go into. And then we just convert the modes into a mode into an array of strings, which is very simple. It's a type, it's a difficulty, it's a meter. It's simple enough. And then once you've done that, then it's compatible with the assumptions I made with the radio table, and you can specify the width, the height, the column widths, the headers, and the modes of string. That's going to be the content. This case, it's not a paginated list as the content. We have all the content right from the start, and we want to display it all right from the start. What else? Is there anything else tricky that happened in here? I had step file mode options as a global before. That doesn't seem rational to me though, because it's not used anywhere else. These mode options are not used anywhere else in the game. So why? Why was I doing it that way? I don't know. So that's great. That's a lot of code that we got to get rid of and clean up. And then we already kind of looked at this, but online playlist. We got to get rid of this class because it really wasn't doing anything except for joining two things together, two strings together. And that is now handled by the online playlist class. Wait. Well, this is the online playlist class, so I didn't actually need to open this class again. But just to finish my thought, I didn't need to concatenate two strings together. I just stuffed them in an array now. That's why this class is gone. But anyways, play from online is what I meant to click on. And you'll see that not only did we get rid of this radio menu, but we also got rid of the page control function. So that's great. That's a lot less code. And I shifted the UI elements around, which is why these values have changed. And what did I do? I changed the order, I guess. Yeah, I put the page controls on top, which just seemed to make sense to me because that's where they are visually. So they should be that same way in the code. Yep, and so instead of draw page controls, it's now this function, which is admittedly bigger and looks scarier. But it's much better than trying to go look at draw page controls and understand what the heck is going on in here. In my opinion, at least. So that's great. That was great. I just got to delete a bunch of code from there. And then storage as well. Storage as well is using the table. And what is this? Why is it doing this? Oh yeah, we're getting rid of draw radio menu. Yep. Where's the actual call to create it though? Oh, it's there. It's just get being weird. It's just get being weird. I bet it's gonna have a plus for these three. No, it doesn't, but whatever. It's just it's just me not understanding the get. But yes, instead of draw radio menu, we now have page controls, which was an addition. We didn't have that before, and we've also got the storage menu. And then everything else is just a bunch of deletions. A bunch of deletions. Nothing else really changed though. It's just that. Just the deletions and adding the menu stuff. Okay, did we go through all the files? Oh yeah, I mentioned the UI util thing. Oh, it wasn't UI util. This was just me deleting a new line at the end of the file. At one point in time, I was obsessed with putting a new line at the end of all my files, but then I realized that like if I had to remind myself to do that, then it wasn't natural and intuitive. So why am I forcing myself to do something that's unnatural when it doesn't have any functional, it doesn't do anything? So that's going to be a part of a lot of my commits, I imagine. And then the util. We got rid of this because this was not being used anywhere else. And we just moved it to the play from file, which is the only one that was using this functionality of sorting the mode options. And then the CSS changes, we already looked at that. Okay, let me, I changed the error message a little bit to give a hint that it was associated with a replay. I don't think many people, well, I think if anyone's going to see an error message, actually, it's likely to be this one. So it's a very minor thing, but I think it might help a little bit. Let's see. Local storage. I did make changes to local storage, didn't I? Why did I? Oh, right. Yeah, so I ended up changing the way that I called load replays. I switched to, I could actually show where exactly I'm making the calls from now. Local storage, load replays. Okay, I changed how I was calling load replays. Because now I had the... Okay, so actually I should explain. Local storage, right, exists as a list of key value pairs. Yeah. If you call window.local storage, it'll be a list of key value pairs. And to access one of those entries, I could either specify a string, which would be the key, or you can actually you can access it like an array. So if you specified a number, I want it to be where if you give it a number, it'll turn. There's this neat function that's just window.localstorage.key, which converts the index in the array to the key. So I figured, oh, that's nice functionality. I'll just shove that in there so you can call it however you want. And I lost my place where. Okay. And then, or for saving the replays, what we do is we hash the notes that are contained in the replay, not the results of the replay, but the notes that were part of the song. We hash that to decide to generate the key. So that's why you can specify a note to the array as an identifier. But anyways, the ability to just use the key to load your replays did not exist before, because that's not the data that I had available when I was using this when I was in the code. But now I have the key. It was probably one of those things where I was just being dumb. Like I didn't understand the full scope of what I was doing back when I wrote the storage list the first time, probably because it had a bunch of copied code in it. And now looking at it again, it's like, oh, I have the key. Why wouldn't I just let us use the key? That seems, yeah, it seems silly. Right, and so that's why there's these changes. I can now use a string as an identifier for an entry in local storage. And I also had an interesting time of is tracks. When you passed in a string, this logic thought that the string was actually a note to the array, because this didn't cause an error if your object is a string, and I thought it would. So I added the fact that, okay, if your object is a 2D array of notes, then you should be able to call track number on the first note and have it not be undefined. So that worked. And then everything else, what did I do? Oh, all these strings that are exactly the same just like ticked me off. You're not supposed to have strings being copied and pasted. You're not supposed to repeat yourself like that. So I put it in in its own function. So that's good. That's slightly cleaner. Okay, I think that's everything. Let me go through one more time to make sure. Yeah, we looked at those. We looked at all these. Yeah, we looked at everything. The dist is just the bundle of all the code together. So naturally, if you make a change here, it's going to show up in the distribution bundle. So we don't need to look at that diff. I'll load it just for the heck of it. Oh, no, the diff is too large. All right, forget it. It's probably for the best because it's all, the code is all like minified, I think. And if it's not minified, it's also got a bunch of like Webpack auto-generated stuff thrown in, so it's not going to be intelligible. Anyways, but anyways, that's the code for you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.